Welcome back to another edition of Between Two Fars. I'm Warnike Miller, and we are speaking with Judge Reid Prouty from the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals. He's a vice chairman over at the ASBCA and has been very kind to help us understand the insider's view of what we experience when we have got a case in front of the ASBCA. Now, just as you get started on your case, one of the first questions you might have is, what is the Rule 4 file and what is expected of NASA? What are we supposed to compile? And you can read the rule off the ASBCA website, and it talks about the type of documentation that we as the government need to provide, and provide rather quickly in this course of litigation. But there's a lot of questions about the best way to present that data, the best way to present all of these documents that will be evidence in your hearing. And so we are just bending your ear a little bit here and asking for your insight. What makes a good Rule 4 file? What are some things that you've seen that you think, oh, what was the agency thinking? Just some guidance here. How do we need to think about our Rule 4 files?
Sure. One way of thinking of Rule 4 file that departs somewhat from the actual written rule, but I'll explain why that's okay in a minute, is think of it as the record. Like if you had a bid protest, you'd have to have a huge record, all the correspondence, all the discussions internally about how the agency came to the conclusion that it came to. You might think about Rule 26 disclosures and with the FRCP. Basically, all the documents that are relevant to it, you sort of hand over. And that's pretty much what you got to do in the Rule 4 file. Now, Rule 4 file, Rule 4 itself actually says the contract and amendments, correspondence between the government and the contractor, and the COFD. And those are the things that are called out. And then the fourth thing, and this is the part that sort of is the exception or the sort of the generality that sort of swallows the rule, is anything the government considers relevant. Okay. Now, it doesn't say anything the government considers relevant that's good for the government. Okay. It doesn't say anything the government feels like giving for its litigation strategy. It says anything you consider relevant. And that really means all the internal discussions that aren't privileged, all of the things that pertain to that contract, you've got to sort of give over in the Rule 4 file. Now, it used to be, back in the old days, before email and things like that, you would sort of go into the contracting officer's office, she, or be he back then, would pull open their sliding door and dump out, a couple inches of file.
Get those banker's boxes ready and
Exactly.
Go stand at the Xerox machine.
Exactly, that was the Rule 4 file. That was really easy, and you would tab it, and that would be that. And you have these big fat binders. And when I joined the board 7 years ago, in fact, half my wall was just taken up with these big fat printed up binders, and we don't do it that way anymore. And we couldn't do it that way anymore either, because Rule 4 files are now so much bigger because of all the electronic documents. So ultimately what's going to happen, and you go on the board's website, because what I tell you now will be obsolete in a month or two, but there's formatting. If you go to our website, we'll tell you how to format it as a PDF, and it's going to be searchable, and you can have tabs. We'll tell you how big of a file you could transmit by email, how much you need to send by disk, DVD, ROM, or whatever. And again, that's on the website. I'm not going to tell you those technical things because, again, as soon as you see this, it'll be overtaken by events. But the bottom line is, it's going to be much more inclusive than if you just read those first three things on the Rule 4 rule require. And of course, once you submit your Rule 4 file with all of this stuff on it, appellant is going to say, well, there's a whole lot more that needs to be put here. And they're going to want to add things. And the best of all worlds will be everything that was in your original file is the stuff that they'd want to put into. Now, they're going to supplement it through discovery, and you're going to supplement it through discovery as well. Because ultimately, the Rule 4 file is going to be one of two things that are cited in the judge's opinion. One is going to be the transcript from the hearing, if there's a hearing, and the second is going to be the Rule 4 file. Because any exhibit at the hearing will hopefully have been in the Rule 4 file in the first instance. So we can all just sort of go to that one a central location for every document that's relevant in the case. One thing besides being expansive in your definition of things that go in the Rule 4 file, I'll urge you to consider is make sure you have signed copies of the contract documents. Okay. Sometimes, and this happens especially with change orders and things of that nature, we've got an electronic version of the change order, but we don't have one with a signature on it. Okay. If it's a bilateral change order and there's no signature on it, that could pose a real problem for both parties. So you might say, well, I've got it electronically unsigned, and somewhere I've got a hard copy that's got a signature on it. We, scan that page with a signature on it, or of course make sure that it's the entire actual change order. Not one electronic 20 pages and then I'll just attach the signature page with no indication that it was actually the real one. But again, if it's signed, we need to see the signed version in the Rule 4 file. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a case where you've got a bilateral modification that would get rid of the case, but it's not signed, and that's only because when you put together the Rule 4 file, you didn't include the right evidence.
And this is actually an issue that will come up frequently because we change contracting officers during the administration of a contract, and you may have a contract file that's been built by a number of different individuals who filed things differently. That's why your quality control check is so important before you file your Rule 4 with the ASBCA. Have that administrative assistant come in as a second set of eyes to go through and look for these obvious disconnects, making sure that all of the documents that you're presenting as the government's evidence contain the signatures and it truly is the evidence of the contract file, as opposed to just the working copy that was emailed out to the contractor for signature. This is a very important and unfortunately often overlooked aspect of the Rule 4 file.
And I'll add one more thing, that the board has Rule 11, and as a litigator, when I heard Rule 11, I think, oh my gosh, somebody's getting in trouble for making a bad argument. But Board Rule 11 is not that rule. Board Rule 11, it basically lets you do a decision on the papers without there being a hearing. Now, you might think, okay, this is a problem because I don't have any testimony. But for Rule 11, you can add affidavits to the Rule 4 file. Both parties can do it. And those are considered part of the evidence that are considered, but they're actually part of the Rule 4 file. So when you have the scheduling order, there's always a date, the last date to supplement the Rule 4 file. And if it is a Rule 11 case, well, that's when you have to have your affidavits in.
Excellent. Thank you for this salient and pertinent advice that is really going to be critical to the attorney who is filing their first Rule 4 file, and to those of us who it's been a while since we've had to file one. Thank you so much for taking the time to just help us understand the very basics of litigation before the ASBCA. And we're not done yet. We've still got Judge Prouty for another day, and we plan on grilling him with many more questions. So stay tuned, and we'll continue in our next episode of Between Two Fars.